You see percentages literally everywhere, right? On sale signs, in the news, heck, even on your phone's battery. But what do they actually mean? Well, over the next few minutes, we're going to crack that code. We'll turn those confusing numbers into a super simple tool you can use like every single day.
Oh, yeah, you know the feeling. You're in a store, you see that big 20% off sign, and your brain just short circuits for a second, right? You're doing that fuzzy math, trying to figure out, is this actually a good deal? What's the real number here? Well, think of percentages as a language. And by the end of this little explainer, trust me, you're going to be fluent.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First up, we're going to figure out what percent really means. Then we'll connect it to fractions, and after that, we'll talk decimals. Once we've got that down, we'll see how this stuff works in the wild, and finally, we'll get a little crazy and go beyond 100%. Sound good? Let's do it. All right, first stop. What does percent even mean? To really get a handle on this, we've got to go right back to the beginning and look at the word itself. Turns out the biggest clue is hiding in plain sight.
Okay, you ready for this? It's actually super simple. The word percent literally breaks down into two Latin words, per, which means for every, and cent, which means 100. Like a century has 100 years. So when you see that little percent symbol, all it's really saying is for every 100. That's it. That's the whole secret.
So if you see 5%, it just means 5 for every 100. Simple as that. And it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It could be 5 blue M&Ms in a bag of 100, $5 off a $100 jacket, or, 5 biscuit crumbs out of 100 on the floor. It's always that same ratio, 5 out of 100. Okay, let's move on to the fraction connection. Now that we know percent just means out of 100, we can start, translating it. And the easiest, most direct way to do that is with fractions, because fractions are also all about parts of a whole.
And the process is super easy. Let's take a common fraction, like 1/2. The goal is to get that bottom number, the denominator, to 100. So what do you do to the 2 to make it 100? You multiply by 50, right? Well, whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So 1 times 50 is 50. Now you've got 50 over 100. And what does out of 100 mean? Percent. So it's 50%. Boom.
Next up, speaking in decimals. So if fractions are like the proper language for percentages, think of decimals as the quick and dirty slang. This is the shortcut. It's less about doing math and more about just knowing a really simple trick. Seriously, this is probably one of the most useful tricks you'll ever learn. To go from a percentage to a decimal, you just slide that decimal point 2 spots to the left. So 20% becomes 0.20. And to go the other way, from a decimal back to a percentage, you guessed it, move it 2 spots to the right. So 0.40 becomes 40%. Just remember, 2 spots, left to lose the percent sign, right to get it back. All right, section 4, percentages in the wild. Look, theory's cool and all, but this stuff is meant to be used. So let's take what we've learned and see how it works in a real-life situation.
Okay, remember those biscuit crumbs? Let's say you spilled 60 of them. Total mess. You grab the vacuum and manage to suck up 80% of them. The big question is, how many crumbs is that exactly? How do we figure out the actual number? This is where our new skills come in handy. Here's a pro tip. In math, whenever you see the word of, it almost always means you need to multiply. So 80% times of 60 is just a multiplication problem. First, we translate 80% into a decimal. Remember? 2 spots to the left. That gives us 0.80. Then we just multiply that by the 60 crumbs. And the answer is 48. You sucked up 48 of those pesky crumbs. See? It's that easy. Once you know how to translate from percent to decimal, these kinds of problems are no problem at all. Okay, final section. Going beyond 100%. So up until now, we've kind of been thinking of 100% as the max, right? The whole thing. But I'm sure you've heard stuff like, our profits are up 150%. So, how is that possible? How can you have more than the whole thing? Let's break it down. Well, it all goes back to fractions again. You know how a normal fraction, like 1/2, is just a piece of the pie, so it's less than 100%? Well, there are also improper fractions, where the top number is bigger than the bottom, like 5/4. What that really means is you have one whole thing, that's the 4/4, plus an extra 1/4 left over. In percentage speak, that's 100% plus another 25%, so you get a grand total of 125%. Okay, so let's recap the big ideas. First, percent just means out of 100.
That's the master key. Second, you can translate any percent into a fraction or a decimal to make it useful. And finally, all these rules still work even when you're dealing with numbers bigger than 100. It's all the same logic. You know, cracking the code is just the beginning. The real fun is using it. You now have this powerful tool that helps you understand store sales, stats in the news, everything. You're fluent in the language of percentages. So the only question left is, what are you going to use it to understand first?